A Tale of Two Documents, a comparative overview of Pope Benedict's Summorum Pontificum and Pope Francis's Traditionis Custodes. Many have complained that Pope Francis's Traditionis Custodes is a slap in the face to Pope Benedict XVI's Summorum Pontificum. But is this true? Pope Benedict's Motu Propios Summorum Pontificum allowed the celebration of the 1962 Missal, also known as the TLM, to be more accessible to the Catholic faithful. Pope Francis's Motu Proprio Traditionis Custodes restricted its celebration back to the situation under Pope John Paul II. So, did Pope Benedict want the 1962 Missal promoted, and Pope Francis want it banned? How do each of these popes view the Novus Ordo? Are these two documents heading in two different directions, or using different strategies in the same direction? To understand these documents correctly, Catholics have to accept some important facts. First, we must accept the distinction between the liturgy and liturgical rites. The liturgy is the sacred action of Christ himself in union with his Church. In relation to the liturgy, the Church is guardian, not creator. Second, liturgical rites are Church-approved expressions of the liturgy. In other words, these two terms are not the same. The liturgy is expressed by liturgical rites. Third, as Vatican II stated, the Pope has jurisdiction, that is authority, over all the liturgical rites of the Catholic Church, which of course includes the Roman Rite. Fourth, the Church is assisted by the Holy Spirit in her renewal of liturgical rites. As the Catechism states, the Church alone is the authentic interpreter of sacred tradition. She decides what is in keeping with sacred tradition and what is not. In short, Pope Benedict had, and Pope Francis has, full and supreme authority over the Church's liturgical rites. In their documents, these popes deal with the Roman liturgical rite, not the liturgy itself. A liturgical rite is never an end in itself, but is always at the service of the higher reality, the liturgy, that it means to protect. Their aim. It's clear from these popes' own words in their Motu Propios or their accompanying letters that the primary goal and motivation of their actions was to reinforce Church unity. But why the different strategies? The matter at stake is one of Church discipline, not doctrine. Popes can use different disciplinary strategies to achieve the same goal. Therefore, continuity of strategy isn't necessary. Here, Popes Benedict and Francis used different strategies to achieve the same goal, Church unity. As Pope Benedict stated in his accompanying letter to Summorum Pontificum, it is a matter of coming to an interior reconciliation in the heart of the Church. And as Pope Francis stated in his accompanying letter to Traditionis Custodes, this unity I intend to re-establish throughout the Church of the Roman Rite. What was each pope's attitude towards the 1962 Missal? Both popes showed their esteem. In Summorum Pontificum, Pope Benedict stated that the 1962 Missal is nonetheless to be duly honoured for its venerable and ancient usage. Pope Francis, in his accompanying letter, notes the dignity and grandeur of the 1962 Missal, as well as acknowledging that it functioned to maintain the unity of the Church. The Second Vatican Council requested revision of the 1962 Missal. But was it really needed? Both Pope Benedict and Pope Francis declared that the Fathers of the Council did think it was needed. In Summorum Pontificum, Pope Benedict stated, "The Second Vatican Council expressed the desire that the respect and reverence due to divine worship should be renewed and adapted to the needs of our time." And in the letter accompanying Summorum Pontificum, the Pope also notes that by the approval of the 1970 Missal, popes sought to ensure that this liturgical edifice, so to speak, reappears in new splendour in its dignity and harmony. In his accompanying letter to Traditionis Custodes, Pope Francis stated, "Without denying the dignity or grandeur of this rite, the bishops gathered in ecumenical council asked that it be reformed." But was the 1970 Missal in line with the vision of the council? Both popes declared that indeed the 1970 Missal is in accordance with the requests of Vatican II. Pope Benedict stated in Summorum Pontificum that the renewed liturgical books, which includes the 1970 Missal, approved for the Latin Church, were willingly received by the bishops as well as by priests and the lay faithful. This indicates that bishops, many of whom were at the council, recognized that the new Missal met the aspirations of the council, more so than the 1962 Missal, venerable though it was. Pope Francis, in his accompanying letter, stated, "The liturgical books promulgated by St. Paul VI and St. John Paul II, in conformity with the decrees of Vatican Council II, are the unique expression of the lex orandi of the Roman Rite." Nonetheless, many have argued that there is a rupture between the two Missals. What do these popes have to say? Neither pope saw any rupture between the 1962 Missal and that of 1970. In his accompanying letter, Pope Benedict stated emphatically, "There is no contradiction between the two editions of the Roman Missal. In the history of the liturgy, there is growth and progress, but no rupture." Interestingly, this last point implies that the 1970 Missal, in Benedict's view, actually represents growth and progress in the Roman Rite. And Pope Francis, in his accompanying letter, with equal emphasis stated, "Whoever wishes to celebrate with devotion, according to the earlier forms of the liturgy, can find in the Reformed Roman Missal, according to Vatican Council II, all the elements of the Roman Rite." In the light of these Pope's statements so far, may we say that Catholics are at liberty simply to ignore the existence of the new Missal? In other words, is it in communion with the Church to choose deliberately never to celebrate or attend a Novus Ordo Mass? Both Popes Benedict and Francis warned that ignoring the new Missal is not a Catholic position. In his accompanying letter to Summorum Pontificum, Pope Benedict stated, "Needless to say, in order to experience full communion, the priests of the communities adhering to the former usage cannot, as a matter of principle, exclude celebrating according to the new books. The total exclusion of the new Missal would not in fact be consistent with the recognition of its value and holiness." Pope Francis, in his accompanying letter, stated, "But I am none the less saddened that the instrumental use of the 1962 Missal is often characterized by a rejection, not only of the liturgical reform, but of the Vatican Council II itself, claiming with unfounded and unsustainable assertions that it betrayed the tradition and the true Church." Later on in this letter, he warns, "To doubt the Council is to doubt the Holy Spirit himself who guides the Church." In other words, this is not a Catholic position. How does each of these popes view the 1970 Missal? Both popes showed a great esteem for the new Missal, pointing to its proper celebration as the way of ensuring true liturgical renewal. In his accompanying letter to Summorum Pontificum, Pope Benedict stated that the reverent and proper celebration of the Novus Ordo will bring out the spiritual richness and the theological depth of this Missal, and he adds, "This kind of celebration will be able to demonstrate the sacrality which attracts many people to the 1962 Missal." In Pope Francis's accompanying letter, he stated, "The new Missal preserved the great richness of the Roman liturgical tradition." But many object that in many places the 1970 Missal isn't celebrated properly. So what about liturgical abuses? Both popes commanded that abuses in the celebration of the 1970 Missal were to be corrected. Pope Benedict in his accompanying letter stated, "The most sure guarantee that the Missal of Paul VI can unite parish communities and be loved by them consists in its being celebrated with great reverence in harmony with the liturgical directives." And Pope Francis in his accompanying letter stated, "I am saddened by liturgical abuses on all sides," including in this statement those abuses which take place in masses according to the 1962 Missal, which should not be overlooked. And he goes on to ask for all of them to be corrected. "I ask bishops to be vigilant in ensuring that every liturgy be celebrated with decorum and fidelity to the liturgical books of Vatican II, without the eccentricities that can easily degenerate into abuse." The fact that both popes have been ignored in many instances is hardly their fault. In an interview in 2018, Pope Benedict remarked that a pope simply commanding abuses to stop will not work. Rather, people must learn what the liturgy is from seeing inwardly, learning what it really means. In other words, the Pope is asking for liturgical formation. Many who simply wish for peace in the Church ask the question, why can't we have both forms of the Missal being of equal canonical status and occurrence in the Latin Rite? But neither Pope showed any intention that the two forms of the Roman Missal should be of equal status or occurrence. In his accompanying letter, Pope Benedict stated, "The new Missal will certainly remain the ordinary form of the Roman Rite, not only on account of the juridical norms, but also because of the actual situation of the communities of the faithful. By this he means that the new Missal is the normative law of prayer in the Latin Rite, because of canon law, and the experience of most Latin Rite Catholics. The other form for Benedict was extraordinary, that is, outside the norm." And Pope Francis in his accompanying letter stated, "The recognition of the 1962 Missal as an extraordinary expression of the same lex orandi did not in any way underrate the liturgical reform, but was decreed with the desire to acknowledge the insistent prayers of these faithful." Some argue that papal interventions in this liturgical matter are not even legitimate, and thus can be ignored. Both popes acknowledged and exercised their papal right to intervene. In his accompanying letter, Pope Benedict made the following request: "I invite all bishops to send to the Holy See an account of your experiences 3 years after this Motu Proprio has taken effect. If truly serious difficulties come to light, ways to remedy them can be sought." If this review did occur, the findings were not published. After 14 years, the similarly unpublished results of a later review under Pope Francis appeared to reveal a disturbing situation. This situation caused Pope Francis to note in his accompanying letter, "Regrettably, the pastoral objective of Benedict XVI, who had intended to do everything possible to ensure that all those who truly possessed the desire for unity would find it possible to remain in this unity or to rediscover it anew, has often been seriously disregarded." And he adds, "The bishop's questionnaire responses reveal a situation that preoccupies and saddens me and persuades me of the need to intervene," which he did. Although Popes Benedict and Francis have used different strategies in their Motu Proprios, they have both pursued the same larger aim, to promote the unity of the Church. Basically, Pope Francis's different strategy returns the restrictions on the 1962 Missal to those set by Pope John Paul II. Ironically, this response was triggered by the schismatic beliefs of some radical traditionalists, whom moderate traditionalists do not seem to correct. If anyone thinks that Pope Francis has misjudged the schismatic mentality evident amongst internet radical traditionalists, they need only to go online and read their articles or listen to their podcasts. The silence of moderate traditionalists in correcting these gurus is puzzling, to say the least. One may disagree with these Pope strategies, but a loyal Catholic was not and is not at liberty to disobey the directives of either one, but rather we are bound to bend our minds to understand and our wills to accept. The answer to the liturgy wars, as both popes state, is liturgical formation, the willingness to be formed in our liturgical understanding by the Church. This means priests instructing the faithful about the theology of the Mass, giving reasons for the revisions of the Roman Rite, celebrating the 1970 Missal with the Ars Celebrandi for which the Church asks, offering the laity all the riches of our Catholic heritage which this Missal makes available. This means the laity becoming aware of our role in the liturgy and the obedience which true liturgical renewal demands. Finally, this means both priests and laity educating themselves from the Church's sources, and not internet gurus, as to what Christ expects of us as loyal children of the Church. For over 50 years, the Church has tried to accommodate the preferences of those who had difficulty transitioning from the older usage of the Roman Rite to its present form. Is it not time for faithful Catholics to ask the Church what her preferences are, and to accommodate them? It is simply wrong to pit one Pope's magisterium against the next. In the end, it is not Christ's will that we lobby the Church to give us the liturgy we like, but that we learn from the Church to love the liturgy she gives.